The rain over Seattle didn't fall so much as it pressed down. A heavy, gray curtain that turned the afternoon sky into a premature twilight. Inside the small, weather-beaten bungalow on Oak Street, the world was dry and smelling faintly of rosemary and damp wool. To the casual observer, the living room was merely a cluttered space of mismatched furniture and second-hand rugs. But to 8-year-old Leo Walker, it was the treacherous terrain of the Kepler 186f exoplanet. The frayed Persian carpet was a lava field. The coffee table, a jagged obsidian ridge, and the oscillating fan in the corner, an atmospheric turbine powering the colony. Leo lay on his stomach, his chin dug into the carpet. His entire universe narrowed down to the 6-inch plastic figure in his hand. It was an old toy, a relic from a bygone era of space exploration merchandise, with paint chipped off the boots and a helmet visor that had yellowed with age. Major Tom. He wasn't just a doll. He was a commander, a confidant, and the only entity in the galaxy who knew exactly what Leo was thinking without him having to say a word. Major Tom to ground control, Leo whispered, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. Oxygen levels are critical. The canyon is steeper than the scans predicted. I'm gonna have to make the jump. He walked the figure's plastic boots along the edge of the coffee table. His small fingers, usually clumsy with pencils and shoelaces, moved with surgical precision here. In this world, Leo wasn't the kid who stuttered when the teacher called on him, or the boy who sat alone at lunch tracing patterns in his applesauce. Here, he was the architect of survival. In the kitchen, separated from the living room by a breakfast bar cluttered with unpaid bills and school flyers, Sarah Walker paused. The knife in her hand hovered over a pile of carrots. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the sound of her son's whispering wash over her. It was a soothing white noise, a confirmation that he was there, safe. Within the four walls, she worked double shifts to keep around them. She opened her eyes and looked at him. From this angle, he looked so small, too small for 8 years old. His socks were mismatched, one navy blue and one black, a battle she had given up fighting months ago. The back of his neck, exposed by a haircut she had given him herself to save $20, looked heartbreakingly fragile. Since Mark had left 3 years ago, packing a bag and driving out of their lives as casually as one might drive to the grocery store, Sarah had felt an overwhelming, sometimes suffocating need to be the barrier between Leo and the cruelty of the world. She was the heat shield, he was the astronaut. "Ground control copies, Major," Sarah called out softly, resuming her chopping. The rhythm of the knife against the wooden board provided a metronome for the quiet house. "Telemetry suggests you have a 5-minute window before the atmospheric storm hits. I'd advise securing the payload." Leo looked up, a gap-toothed grin breaking the intense concentration on his face. It was the only time he truly smiled like that, when she joined him in the void. "Roger that. Ground control. Payload is the remote control. The dark matter drive," Sarah corrected without missing a beat. "Don't lose it in the lava." Leo giggled, a bright sound that seemed to push back the gloom pressing against the windows. He scrambled up, clutching Major Tom tightly. He brought the toy close to his face, inspecting it. To anyone else, the figure was garbage. The joints were loose, and the battery compartment on the back was held together by sheer willpower and a piece of scotch tape that was peeling at the edges. But Leo treated it like a holy relic. He ran his thumb over the scratched chest plate. "Mom?" Leo asked, his voice returning to its usual tentative volume. "Yeah, Bug? Do you think real astronauts get scared?" Sarah scraped the carrots into the pot, the sizzle of oil filling the silence. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked around the counter, kneeling on the carpet so she was eye level with him. She brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I think they do, Leo. I think being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the mission anyway." Leo considered this, looking at Major Tom. "Major Tom isn't scared. He's made of plastic." "Well, he's lucky," Sarah smiled, tapping the toy's helmet. "But you have a heart. That's better." Leo hugged the toy to his chest. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, a heavy, wooden pendulum clock that had come with the house. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was 4:10 p.m. The afternoon felt stretched, elastic. Suddenly, the ambient noise shifted. The relentless drumming on the roof slowed, then tapered off into a sporadic patter. A shaft of pale, watery sunlight pierced through the gray cloud cover, slicing through the front window and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The sudden brightness was startling. Leo scrambled to the window, pressing his nose against the cold glass. "Mom!" The rain stopped. "Look!" Sarah stood up and joined him. Outside, the street was glistening. Puddles reflected the breaking clouds like jagged mirrors. The weeping willow in the front yard dripped rhythmically onto the sidewalk. It was that brief, magical window in a Seattle autumn where the world feels washed clean. "Can I go out?" Leo asked, turning to her, his eyes wide. "Just for a bit? Major Tom needs to scan the exterior sector." Sarah hesitated. Her instinct was always no. Keep him inside. Keep him close. The world was full of cars that drove too fast, dogs that bit, and people who didn't understand sensitive boys. But she looked at the energy vibrating through him. He had been cooped up inside for 2 days of straight rain. He was vibrating with kinetic energy. "Please?" Leo begged. "I'll stay on the sidewalk. Promise. I just want to ride my bike to the stop sign and back." "Major Tom needs a vehicle." Sarah glanced at the clock. For 15 p.m. Dinner wouldn't be ready until 5 o'clock. The street was quiet. It was a Tuesday. Most people were still at work. "Okay," she sighed, the word feeling heavy on her tongue for reasons she couldn't explain. A strange prickle ran down the back of her neck, a primitive warning system she chose to ignore. It was just anxiety. It was just the burden of being the only parent. "But listen to me. The sidewalk only. You stop at the big oak tree on the corner and you turn around. Do not cross the street. Do not talk to strangers." "I know, Mom," Leo groaned, already running for the door. Grabbing his yellow raincoat from the hook, he shoved his arms into the sleeves, Major Tom never leaving his grip. "Ground control creates too many regulations. Ground control keeps you alive," Sarah retorted, though she was smiling. She walked him to the front door and opened it. The air that rushed in was cold and smelled of wet asphalt and pine needles. Leo grabbed his small red bicycle from the porch, kicking the kickstand up. He placed Major Tom carefully in the front basket, securing him with a piece of twine he kept there for this exact purpose. "Check your helmet," Sarah commanded. Leo buckled his helmet, then gave her a thumbs up. "Systems go." 10 minutes, Leo," Sarah said, leaning against the doorframe, hugging her cardigan tighter around herself against the chill. "If you're not back by 4:30, I'm sending a search and rescue team." "Roger," Leo shouted. He pushed off, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. Sarah watched him pedal away. He looked wobbly at first, then found his balance. She watched him reach the neighbor's driveway, House 402, the immaculate lawn, the perfectly trimmed hedges. Mr. Arthur was out there, kneeling by his flower bed, wearing that oversized beige cardigan he always wore. She saw Arthur look up. She saw him wave, a friendly, grandfatherly wave. She saw Leo slow down, his little legs backpedaling to bring the bike to a halt near Arthur's fence. Sarah felt a momentary relaxation. Arthur was a fixture of the neighborhood, a retired school teacher or maybe a librarian. She couldn't remember. He fixed the kids' flat tires. He was safe. "Be careful," she called out one last time, her voice carrying down the street. Leo didn't look back. He just pedaled on past Arthur, toward the corner oak tree. Sarah watched until he made the turn, then lingered for another moment, watching the empty street. The sun was already fading, the clouds closing the wound in the sky. She stepped back inside and closed the door. The click of the latch sounded final, like the sealing of an airlock. She didn't know it yet, but that was the last time the door would close on her life as she knew it. The silence of the house, once peaceful, began to pool around her ankles, rising steadily. She went back to the kitchen, picked up the knife and resumed chopping the carrots. Tick-tock. 4:18 p.m. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the last few leaves from the trees, And down the street, just beyond the range of Sarah's view, a bicycle lay on its side, its front wheel spinning slowly in the empty air. The wet asphalt hissed beneath the rubber tires of the small red bicycle, a sound like frying bacon that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet neighborhood. Leo Walker pedaled with the grim determination of a pilot navigating an asteroid field. The recent rain had left the world glistening and sharp. Every leaf on the pavement was a navigational hazard, every puddle a deep space nebula to be avoided. In the front basket, Major Tom rattled against the wire mesh, his plastic face stoic and unblinking, staring straight ahead into the wind. Leo reached the great oak tree at the corner of the block, the absolute edge of his permissible universe. He squeezed the handbrakes, and the bike skidded to a halt, spraying a fan of cold water onto his shins. He planted his sneakers on the ground, breathing in the scent of wet bark and ozone. He checked his imaginary dashboard. Fuel levels, optimal. Hull integrity, 100%. The mission parameters were simple. Scan the perimeter and return to base before the mess hall opened at 0500 hours. He turned the handlebars, executing a clumsy U-turn. The house looked different from here, smaller, sadder somehow, with the porch light fighting a losing battle against the gathering gray of the late afternoon. Between him and the safety of his front door lay the expanse of Oak Street, lined with houses that seemed to be sleeping. Except for number 402. As Leo pedaled back, gaining speed, he saw Mr. Arthur standing by his white picket fence. Arthur was a fixture of the street, a man who seemed to have been born old. He wore a beige cardigan that hung loosely on his frame and thick glasses that magnified his eyes into kindly, watery orbs. He was pruning his hydrangeas, clipping the heavy, waterlogged blooms with a rhythmic snip, snip, snip. Leo slowed down. He liked Mr. Arthur. Last summer, when Leo's chain had popped off, Arthur had fixed it in 30 seconds, his hands greasy and confident, and hadn't even told Leo's mom about the mishap. "Easy there, Commander," Arthur called out, straightening up. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together, raspy but warm. He smiled, crinkling the deep maps of wrinkles around his eyes. "That's some serious velocity you've got there." Leo stopped the bike, balancing on his tiptoes. "I'm on a mission," he said, breathless. "Patrol." "Ah, the burden of command." Arthur nodded solemnly, wiping his shears on a rag. He glanced at the plastic figure in the basket. "And I see you have your second-in-command with you, Major Tom, isn't it?" Leo beamed. Adults usually ignored the doll or called it, "your toy." Arthur always got the name right. "He's checking for radiation." Arthur leaned over the fence. The smell coming off him wasn't wet earth like the rest of the world. It was something sweeter, cloying, like peppermint candies that had been in a pocket too long. "Well, it's a good thing you stopped. I've been meaning to flag you down. I was cleaning out my basement this morning. Dusty work for an old man, and I found something. I think it belongs to a man of your specific qualifications." Leo's curiosity piqued, overriding the internal clock ticking in his head. "What is it?" Arthur looked around conspiratorially, then lowered his voice. "My son's old things. He's grown up now, moved away, but he left a box. Inside there's a Lego set, not just any set. It's the International Space Station, the limited edition one with the solar arrays that actually rotate." Leo's mouth dropped open slightly. He knew that set. He had stared at it in the catalogs until the pages were worn thin. It cost more money than his mom made in a week. "The one with the docking arm?" "The very same," Arthur said. "But here's the problem. The box fell. It's all in pieces. Thousands of them. My eyes aren't what they used to be, Leo. I can't put it back together. I was thinking, if a smart young engineer like you could come help me sort the pieces, maybe assemble a module or two, well, you could just keep it. There's no use to me in a box." The offer hung in the damp air, shimmering like gold. The space station, his own station. But then, the voice of ground control echoed in his mind. "Stay on the sidewalk. Don't talk to strangers." Leo bit his lip, his grip tightening on the handlebars. I can't. Mom said 10 minutes. I have to go back." Arthur's face fell, a mask of exaggerated disappointment. "Oh, I understand. Rules are rules." He paused, looking toward Leo's house, then back at the boy. A strange gleam flickered behind the thick lenses. "Tell you what, why don't I just check with her? Technology is amazing these days." Arthur pulled a smartphone from his cardigan pocket. It looked too modern for him, a sleek black slab of glass. He tapped the screen with a thick thumb. "I have your mother's number from the neighborhood watch list. Let me just send a quick text." Leo watched, frozen. He didn't know adults could just text each other like that. Arthur typed, waited a beat, and then the phone chimed. "There." Arthur smiled, turning the screen toward Leo, though he pulled it back before Leo could really read it. She says, "That's fine, Arthur. Tell him to be home by 5:15 for dinner." See? Ground control has extended the mission window. The lie was smooth, seamless, and delivered with the absolute authority of adulthood. The tension in Leo's shoulders evaporated. If Mom said it was okay, then it was okay. Mom knew everything. "Really?" Leo asked, hope surging in his chest. "Really?" Arthur said, opening the gate. The latch made a heavy clack. "Come on. It's just downstairs. Bring the major. We might need his expertise on the schematics." Leo kicked the kickstand down. He left the red bicycle leaning against the white fence, a splash of color against the gray wood. He grabbed Major Tom from the basket and walked up the paved path. The house loomed over him, the windows like dark, heavy-lidded eyes. As he stepped onto the porch, the air grew colder. Arthur opened the front door, and the smell of peppermint intensified, mixed with something else. Something musty and stagnant, like air that hadn't moved in years. "After you, Commander," Arthur said, gesturing into the gloom. Leo stepped across the threshold. The floorboards creaked under his sneakers. The hallway was long and lined with faded wallpaper that depicted repetitive, pastoral scenes of hunters and dogs. It felt nothing like his home, which was messy and bright. This place felt perfectly preserved, like a museum exhibit where nothing was allowed to be touched. "Down here," Arthur said, guiding him toward a door under the staircase. "The lab is secure." Leo followed. As he walked, he felt a strange prickle on his neck. He looked down at Major Tom in his hand. Something feels wrong, he thought. The telemetry is off. But the promise of the Lego set pulled him forward like a gravity well. Arthur opened the basement door. A cool draft drifted up, carrying the scent of raw concrete. "Go on down. The light switch is at the bottom. I'll be right behind you with some lemonade." Leo took the first step. The wood groaned. He took the second. The darkness below seemed absolute. He clutched Major Tom tighter, his thumb finding the small groove on the toy's back. He wanted to document this. He wanted to be brave. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, battery-operated voice recorder his mom had rigged up for him inside the toy's battery pack last week. He pressed the button with a trembling finger. "Major Tom, this is a mission log," he whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. The mothership is unsuspecting. Behind him, at the top of the stairs, the silhouette of Arthur blocked out the light from the hallway. The old man wasn't smiling anymore. He was watching Leo descend with a look of hungry anticipation, his hand resting on the deadbolt of the basement door. Back at house number 408, Sarah Walker wiped her hands on a dish towel. She looked up at the clock. Tick, tock, 4:32 p.m. 2 minutes late, Buster, she murmured to the empty kitchen, shaking her head affectionately. She walked to the window, expecting to see the red bicycle pulling into the driveway. The street was empty. The wind blew a few dead leaves across the asphalt in a dry skitter. The red bicycle was leaning against the neighbor's fence, for houses down. But the sidewalk was bare. Sarah frowned. A small, cold stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. "Leo?" she said, her voice barely a whisper against the glass. The transition from annoyance to terror is not a sudden cliff. It is a slow, sliding slope covered in loose gravel, where you don't realize you are falling until it is impossible to claw your way back up. For Sarah Walker, the slide began at 4:45 p.m. The silence in the kitchen had curdled, turning from peaceful to oppressive. The carrots were chopped, the water was boiling, but the front door remained shut. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to grow louder, each second a hammer striking an anvil. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric damp with condensation, and walked to the front window for the fourth time. The street was darkening. The brief, miraculous window of sunlight had collapsed, swallowed by the returning gray clouds that were already bruising the horizon. The streetlights flickered on, buzzing with a sickly sodium-orange glow that reflected off the wet pavement. The red bicycle was still there. It leaned against the white picket fence of House 402, a splash of cheerful crimson against the mute tones of the dying afternoon. It looked abandoned, like a relic from a civilization that had vanished hours ago. Why was it there? Leo never left his bike unlocked. He treated that bicycle like a spacecraft. You didn't just leave a spacecraft floating in orbit. Sarah unlocked the front door and stepped out. The cold air slapped her face, carrying the scent of impending rain. "Leo," she called out. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed instantly by the vast, indifferent acoustics of the suburbs. "Leo, dinner. Right now." She waited for the familiar sound. The scuff of sneakers on pavement, the apology, the breathless excuse about a newly discovered galaxy. She heard nothing but the distant hum of traffic on the highway and the wind rattling the bare branches of the oak trees. She walked down the driveway, her pace quickening with every step. By the time she reached the sidewalk, she was jogging. By the time she reached Arthur's fence, she was running. She grabbed the handlebars of the bike. The metal was cold and slick with moisture. The helmet was hanging from the brake lever by its strap, swaying gently in the breeze. But the basket, the wire mesh basket where Major Tom always sat, was empty. Sarah looked at the house. Number 402 stood silent, its windows dark except for a faint, yellow glow coming from the kitchen in the back. The hydrangeas Arthur had been pruning were motionless. She unlatched the gate and marched up the path to the front door, pounding on the wood with the flat of her hand. "Mr. Arthur, Arthur." A long minute passed. Sarah was about to pound again when the door creaked open. Arthur stood there, blinking, wiping his glasses with a handkerchief. He looked smaller than he had in the garden, frielier. He wore a different sweater now, a thick wool one, and held a half-eaten piece of toast. "Sarah?" he asked, squinting at her. "Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Leo," she gasped, the panic finally bubbling up into her throat. "His bike is out front. Have you seen him? He was supposed to be back 15 minutes ago." Arthur frowned, a look of genuine confusion washing over his face. He leaned out, looking past her at the bicycle. "Oh, is that his? I saw him. Oh, must have been 20 minutes ago. He parked it there. I thought he was coming in to say hello, but then he saw something down the street. A cat, maybe?" He ran off toward the park. He pointed a gnarled finger toward the wooded area at the end of the block. "I assumed he was playing a game. He didn't come home?" "The park," Sarah repeated, her stomach dropping. "He's not allowed in the park alone." "Well, you know boys," Arthur said gently, taking a bite of his toast. "They get distracted. I'm sure he's just lost track of time. Do you want me to help you look?" "No," Sarah said, stepping back, her eyes darting toward the dark tree line at the end of the street. "No, I'll go get him. Sorry to bother you." She turned and ran. She didn't see Arthur watch her go, his expression shifting from concern to a flat, predatory calculation before he quietly closed the door and slid the deadbolt home. Sarah ran to the park. She screamed Leo's name until her throat felt raw, like she had swallowed glass. She checked the slide, the swings, the cluster of bushes where the neighborhood kids built forts. The park was empty, a desolate landscape of wet metal and wood chips. The shadows stretched longer, turning into grasping fingers. The wind picked up, and the rain began to fall again. Not a drizzle this time, but a cold, stinging sheet. 5:30 p.m. The world was black and gray. 6 p.m. She was back at the house, her clothes soaked, her hair plastered to her skull. She stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the carpet. The phone clutched in her trembling hand. She had called his friends. No one had seen him. She had called the school. Nothing. She dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? My son. Sarah choked out, the reality of the words shattering her. My son is missing. The next hour was a blur of blue and red lights. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, their strobes cutting through the rain, painting the living room walls in a disorienting disco of emergency colors. The neighbors were out on their porches now, huddled under umbrellas, watching the drama unfold with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Officer Miller, a man with a heavy face and eyes that looked like they had seen too much sadness, stood in Leo's bedroom. He was taking notes in a small spiral notebook. Sarah stood in the doorway, hugging herself, her teeth chattering from shock and cold. Height, 4 feet 2. Brown hair, wearing a yellow raincoat, Miller recited, confirming the details. And you said there was no argument? No reason for him to run off? No, Sarah insisted, her voice shrill. He was happy. He was playing spaceman. He never breaks the rules. He's afraid of the dark, officer. He wouldn't be out there alone. We're going to organize a grid search, Miller said, his voice calm, practiced. But Mrs. Walker, I have to ask, is there a father in the picture? Someone who might have picked him up? His father lives in Oregon. He hasn't seen Leo in 3 years, Sarah snapped. It's not him. Another officer, a younger woman, walked in from the hallway. She was holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a piece of lined notebook paper, damp around the edges. Detective, the female officer said, I found this on the front porch. It was tucked under a flower pot. The wind must have blown it slightly. Miller took the bag. He read the note, his eyebrows knitting together. He looked at Sarah, then back at the note. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The urgency evaporated, replaced by a weary resignation. Mrs. Walker, Miller said, handing the bag to her. Is this your son's handwriting? Sarah took the bag with shaking hands. She looked at the paper. The letters were large, slightly erratic, written in blue crayon. Mom, you don't understand me. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Sarah stared at the words. The shapes of the letters were familiar. The loop of the L, the jagged M. It looked like Leo's writing. But the words, the sentiment, it was alien. It was the language of a teenager, a melodramatic TV character, not her 8-year-old boy who still slept with a nightlight. This, Sarah stammered. This looks like his writing. But he didn't write this. He wouldn't say this. Miller sighed, capping his pen. Mrs. Walker, look at the room. His backpack is gone. Some clothes are missing from the drawers. And now this note fits the pattern. What pattern? Sarah demanded, stepping forward. The pattern of a runaway, Miller said gently. It happens. Kids get upset, they pack a bag, they leave a note. Usually, they go to a friend's house or a hideout nearby. He's probably hiding, waiting for you to calm down about whatever fight you two had. We didn't fight, Sarah screamed, the sound tearing through the house. He didn't run away. He left Major Tom. Major Tom? Miller asked, confused. His toy, his astronaut. Sarah gestured wildly to the empty bed. He takes it everywhere. If he packed a bag, he would have taken the toy. The fact that he's gone and the toy is... Wait, she stopped. Her eyes scanned the room. The bed was empty. The floor was clear. Major Tom was gone. You said he takes the toy everywhere? Miller asked. Yes, Sarah whispered. It's not here, so he took it. Which supports the theory that he packed his things and left, Miller said, closing his notebook. Look, we'll keep the patrol cars circling. We'll put out a bolo. But right now, this looks like a domestic dispute, not an abduction. Go get some rest, Mrs. Walker. He'll probably walk through that door when he gets hungry. The police began to file out. The blue and red lights stopped flashing, leaving the house in darkness. Sarah stood alone in the center of the living room. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. The note lay on the coffee table, a damning piece of evidence that everyone believed. Everyone except her. Because she knew her son. She knew he couldn't spell understand. He would have written understand. The rain hammered against the roof, sounding like 1,000 tiny fists beating against a coffin lid. Sarah sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was alone. The police had given up. The world had moved on. But as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, they landed on the one thing the police had missed. The one thing that didn't make sense. If Leo had packed his backpack and run away, why were his favorite sneakers still by the back door? The taillights of Officer Miller's cruiser dissolved into the rainy night, 2 red eyes blinking shut, leaving Sarah Walker alone in a silence that felt heavy enough to crush her ribs. The house, usually a sanctuary of warmth and noise, had transformed into a crime scene, though the police refused to call it that. To them, it was just a vacuum where a boy used to be, a void filled with the paperwork of a standard domestic incident. Sarah stood in the hallway, clutching the plastic evidence bag containing the note. "Mom, you don't understand me." She read it again and again. The letters swam before her eyes, blurring into blue caterpillars. The police saw a confession of teenage angst. Sarah saw a lie. She walked into the kitchen, the linoleum cold against her bare feet, and slapped the bag onto the counter next to the cooling pot of boiled carrots. "Understand," she whispered to the empty room. Leo had a speech impediment. He had trouble with multisyllable words. When he wrote, he spelled phonetically. Understand. Understand. He never, in his 8 years of life, had spelled it with the perfectly placed. And the phrase, "Mom, you don't understand me," that was the language of a sitcom teenager. The kind of dialogue Arthur's generation thought children spoke. It wasn't the language of a boy who communicated in star charts and mission logs. She looked at the back door. The sneakers were there. His favorite sneakers, the ones with the flashing lights in the heels that he stomped in to make them blink. He had worn his old, scuffed gym shoes out to ride the bike because she had told him the new ones were for indoor missions only. If he had planned to run away, to walk miles to a hideout, he would have taken the light-up shoes. They were his power boots. He believed they made him run faster. "He didn't leave," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "He was taken." She moved toward Leo's bedroom. The police had done a cursory glance, opened the closet, checked under the bed, verified the missing backpack. They saw what they expected to see, a room stripped of essentials by a fugitive child. But they didn't know the room. They didn't know the ecosystem of a boy's life. She stepped inside. The room smelled of lavender detergent and the faint, metallic tang of ozone from his ionizer lamp. She stood in the center, closing her eyes, trying to reconstruct the crime. If Leo came back to pack a bag, he would have been in a hurry. He would have taken the essentials. She opened his underwear drawer. It was messy. Leo folded his clothes in tight military rolls. These were jumbled. Someone had grabbed handfuls. She looked at the bookshelf. His space encyclopedia was there. He wouldn't leave that. She looked at the bed. The duvet was rumpled, pulled half off the mattress. And then she saw it. It was barely visible, just a flash of white plastic wedged between the bed frame and the wall, half shrouded by the hanging sheet. Sarah's breath hitched. She fell to her knees, reaching into the gap. Her fingers brushed against cold, hard plastic. She pulled it out. Major Tom. The astronaut stared back at her with his painted-on stoicism. He was wet. Sarah gasped, dropping the toy onto the duvet as if it had burned her. She touched the fabric of the astronaut's suit. It was damp, not soaked, but slick with moisture. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with terrifying clarity. Leo had taken Major Tom on the bike ride. She had seen him put it in the basket. The basket was empty when she found the bike at Arthur's house. Now, Major Tom was here in the bedroom, but Leo wasn't. If Leo had come back to pack his bag and run away, he would have taken the toy with him. He wouldn't have wedged it behind the bed. And why was it wet? because it had been outside. "Someone brought you back," Sarah whispered, horror dawning on her. While she was at the park screaming her son's name, while she was running through the rain, someone had been here. Someone had entered her house. Someone had grabbed a backpack, stuffed it with random clothes to stage a runaway, and in their haste they had tossed the toy, which they must have found in the bike basket or Leo's pocket, aside, thinking it was trash. They didn't know Major Tom was a crew member. To them, it was just a piece of plastic. The intruder had been in her home. Sarah grabbed the toy again, clutching it to her chest, rocking back and forth. The violation made her nauseous. But beneath the fear, a steel rod of determination began to form in her spine. The police were wrong. This wasn't a runaway. This was a staged crime scene. And if it was staged, the person who did it made mistakes. She looked at the toy in her hands. She wiped a smudge of dirt from its helmet. As she turned it over, her thumb brushed against the battery compartment on the back. She paused. Sarah knew every inch of this toy. She had performed surgery on it a dozen times. Gluing an arm back on, repainting the boots. The battery cover was usually held in place by a piece of duct tape because the original screw had been stripped years ago. But now there was no tape. Instead, a shiny, silver screw held the plastic cover tight. It was a Phillips head, pristine and unstripped. "I didn't do that," Sarah murmured. She scrambled up, rushing to the kitchen junk drawer. She dug through the mess of rubber bands and takeout menus until she found a small eyeglass screwdriver. Her hands shook so violently she dropped it twice before she managed to insert the tip into the screw head. Twist, twist. The screw came loose. It was oiled, turned smoothly. She pried the plastic cover off. There were no AA batteries inside. The compartment had been gutted. The metal springs had been bent back to make room for something else. Wedged tight into the hollow space was a small, rectangular chip. A micro-SD card. Sarah froze. She recognized the card. It was from her old digital camera, the one she had given Leo to play with months ago. He liked to pretend it was a data drive containing the secrets of the universe. Why was it inside the doll? And why was there a new screw? Leo couldn't use a screwdriver. He lacked the fine motor skills for something this small. Someone had helped him, or someone had hidden this. She ran to her laptop on the dining table, flipping the lid open. The screen glowed to life, illuminating her pale, frantic face. She searched for the SD card adapter, jamming it into the side of the computer. A folder popped up on the screen. DCIM. Inside, there was a single file, an audio file, created today, 4:32 p.m. 4:32 p.m. 2 minutes after Leo was supposed to be home. Sarah hovered her cursor over the file. The room seemed to tilt. The ticking clock faded away. The rain disappeared. There was only the laptop screen and the small, black triangle of the play button. If this was a game, it was the last game Leo had played. If it was a message, it was the only lifeline she had. She put her finger on the trackpad. She took a breath that tasted of fear and copper. She clicked. Static hissed through the laptop speakers, loud and harsh in the quiet house. Then the sound of rustling fabric. And then a voice. "Major Tom, this is a mission log," Leo's voice whispered, breathless and excited. "The mothership is unsuspecting. I have infiltrated the enemy base to retrieve the energy core." Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. He was alive. At 4:32 p.m., he was alive. "The alien commander says he needs help with the docking sequence," Leo continued, dropping the astronaut persona for a second. "He has the Lego set, Major, the big one." Then, another voice cut through the static. It was distant, coming from across a room, but the acoustics were unmistakable. It was deep, trying to be gentle but carrying an undercurrent of impatience. "Leo, come on down, son. The lemonade is cold." Sarah stopped breathing. The blood in her veins turned to ice water. She knew that voice. She heard it every morning when she checked the mail. She heard it when she took out the trash. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random drifter. It was the man who had stood on his porch 20 minutes ago, eating toast and looking confused. It was Arthur. The voice on the laptop ceased, leaving a silence in the room that was louder than the storm raging outside. Arthur's words, "Come on down, son. The lemonade is cold," hung in the air like a toxic vapor. Sarah stared at the screen, her pupils dilated, her breathing shallow and jagged. The world around her, the familiar comforts of her dining room, the smell of the boiled carrots, the ticking clock, all of it dissolved. The only reality that remained was the house across the street. House 402, the lair of the wolf who had been smiling at her over the fence for 3 years. For a moment, Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. The shock was a physical weight pinning her to the chair. Arthur? The man who brought her tomatoes from his garden? The man who fixed Leo's bike chain? It was a betrayal so profound it felt like a violation of the laws of physics. But then, the image of the wet astronaut doll on the bed flashed in her mind. Leo's guardian, abandoned. The shock evaporated, replaced instantaneously by a cold, searing clarity. This wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a war. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen. She dialed Detective Miller again. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. "You have reached the voicemail of Detective Miller. Please leave a message." "Damn you!" Sarah shrieked, hurling the phone onto the couch. She didn't have time for voicemails. She didn't have time to explain to a skepticism-weary cop that the sweet old man next door was a monster. Every second she wasted on bureaucracy was a second Arthur had with her son. She grabbed the laptop, swiftly emailing the audio file to Miller's address, hitting send with a force that nearly cracked the trackpad. Then she typed a text, her thumbs flying. "It's Arthur. House 402. Audio sent. I'm going in." She didn't wait for a reply. She stood up, and the transformation was complete. The weeping, terrified mother was gone. In her place was something ancient, something primal, a creature driven by the singular biological imperative to protect its young. She marched into the kitchen. She needed a weapon. She pulled open the silverware drawer, her hand hovering over the chef's knife. No, too light, too close range. She needed something that could break bone, something that could shatter locks. She turned to the cabinet under the sink, shoving aside bottles of bleach and drain cleaner until her hand closed around the cold, heavy steel of a pipe wrench. It was rusted orange at the hinges, a tool her ex-husband had left behind, heavy enough to crush a skull. She weighed it in her hand. Felt right. Felt necessary. Sarah moved to the back door. She didn't bother with a coat. She didn't care about the rain or the cold. She unlocked the door and stepped out into the deluge. The wind hit her instantly, whipping her hair across her face, soaking her blouse within seconds. The backyard was a swamp of mud and darkness, illuminated only by the sporadic flashes of lightning that tore through the purple sky. She vaulted over the low wooden fence that separated her yard from Arthur's. A splinter tore into her palm, but she didn't feel it. She landed in his garden, her boots crushing the prize-winning hydrangeas he had been pruning just hours ago. The sight of the crushed flowers gave her a grim satisfaction. The back of Arthur's house was dark, a towering shadow against the storm. She crept toward the rear patio, the wrench gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. She pressed her back against the siding, listening. The rain masked any sound from inside. She peeked through the glass of the sliding patio door. The kitchen was dimly lit by the stove light. It was empty. A plate of half-eaten toast sat on the counter. The door was locked. Of course it was. Sarah looked around. She grabbed a heavy ceramic planter from the patio table, dumping out the dead geraniums. She wrapped her hand in the hem of her wet shirt to protect it. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she swung the wrench. Crack. The sound was swallowed by a timely clap of thunder, but the glass shattered inward, raining diamonds onto the linoleum floor. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached through the jagged hole, ignoring the bite of glass into her forearm, and flipped the latch. She slid the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. It wasn't the smell of a monster's lair. It was the smell of a grandmother's house. Peppermint, old paper, and lemon polish. It was sickeningly normal. The dishwasher was humming. A calendar on the wall featured pictures of kittens. It was a camouflage so perfect it made her stomach turn. "Leo?" she whispered, the name catching in her throat. Silence answered her. The house felt vast and hollow, the air stagnant. She moved through the kitchen, the wrench raised, stepping over the broken glass. She checked the living room. Empty. The television was off, but the remote sat precisely parallel to the edge of the coffee table. Everything was meticulous, controlled. She moved into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under her weight, sounding like gunshots in the quiet house. She froze, heart hammering against her ribs, waiting for Arthur to lunge from the shadows. But there was nothing, no movement, just the ticking of a clock that matched the one in her own home. Tick, tock, where would he keep him? "Come on down, son, down." The basement. Sarah scanned the hallway. There were 3 doors. One was a bathroom. One was a coat closet. The third, tucked under the staircase, was solid wood, painted a creamy white that matched the trim. She approached it. She tried the knob. Locked. Not just a privacy lock, but a heavy-duty deadbolt that looked completely out of place on an interior door. Above the knob was a keypad, a modern, glowing blue digital lock that seemed alien in this house of antiques. He was down there. She knew it in her marrow. "Arthur!" she screamed, abandoning all stealth. "I know you're in there. Open the door." No answer. Just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sarah stepped back, adrenaline flooding her system with the potency of a drug. She raised the pipe wrench with both hands, channeling every ounce of fear, every ounce of rage, every sleepless night and every scrapped knee she had ever kissed better. She swung the wrench at the digital lock. Wham! Plastic shattered. Sparks flew. The keypad dangled by a red wire, but the bolt held. "Open it," she shrieked, swinging again. Wham! And again. Wham! She hammered the wood around the lock. Splinters flew into her face. The door frame began to give way, the wood groaning in protest. She was a woman possessed, a force of nature more violent than the storm outside. She didn't care if Arthur had a gun. She didn't care if she died. She was going to get through this door. With one final, guttural scream, she kicked the area she had weakened. The wood splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung inward, banging against the wall. A draft of cold, earthy air rushed up from the darkness below. It smelled of damp concrete and something else, faintly metallic. The stairs descended into a pitch-black abyss. Sarah panted, her chest heaving, her hair plastered to her face. She reached for the light switch on the wall, but nothing happened. He had cut the power to the stairs. She tightened her grip on the wrench. She couldn't see what was waiting for her at the bottom. It was a throat of darkness, ready to swallow her whole. But somewhere down there, Leo was waiting. She took the first step. The wood groaned under her boot. "I'm coming, baby," she whispered into the dark. "Mommy's coming." She took the second step, then the third. As she descended, the cozy smell of peppermint faded, replaced by the sterile, cold scent of captivity. She was leaving the world of the living and entering the underworld, and she was ready to burn it down to bring him back. The descent was a journey into the throat of a beast. Sarah moved one step at a time, her back pressed against the rough plaster of the stairwell wall. The pipe wrench raised high near her ear like a crude scepter of violence. The darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the faint, sickly rectangle of light spilling from the shattered doorframe above. Every creak of the wooden steps under her boots sounded like a gunshot in the confined space, amplified by the drumming of her own heart which seemed to be vibrating against her ribcage. The air grew colder with every foot she descended, the humidity of the storm replaced by a dry, refrigerated chill that smelled of sawdust and old iron. It was the smell of a workshop, of a place where things were built and fixed or taken apart. At the bottom of the stairs, the darkness opened up into a wider space. Sarah paused, her eyes straining to adjust. She reached into her jeans pocket and pulled out her phone, her thumb trembling as she toggled the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, dancing wildly across the room as her hand shook. It was a workshop, but it was too clean. The beam swept over a workbench where tools were arranged with surgical precision. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, all hung on a pegboard, outlined in black marker so that if one was missing, the absence would be glaring. There was no dust, no resistance. It was a shrine to order. Sarah's light caught the gleam of something red in the corner. She swung the beam toward it. It was a bicycle wheel, a small one, then another, a pile of bicycle parts, stripped and sorted. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. This was how Arthur fixed the neighborhood kids' bikes. He took them apart, possessed them, and then put them back together. It was a rehearsal. "Leo," she whispered. The sound died instantly, absorbed by the heavy atmosphere. She moved past the workbench. The basement extended further back, into the foundation of the house. There was a hallway here, narrow and claustrophobic, leading to a single door at the far end. This door was different. It wasn't the hollow core wood of 1950s suburbia. It was heavy, solid steel, painted a dull gray. It looked like the entrance to a meat locker. Sarah approached it, her breath pluming in the cold air. There was no handle, only a heavy sliding bolt on the outside. On the outside, a sob caught in her throat, a jagged sound of pure heartbreak. You don't put a bolt on the outside of a room unless you want to keep something in. She holstered the phone in her pocket, the light still shining upward, casting grotesque shadows on her face. She gripped the cold metal of the bolt with her free hand. It was stiff. She shoved the pipe wrench under her armpit and used both hands, gritting her teeth, heaving against the mechanism. It groaned, metal grinding on metal, and slid back with a heavy clunk. She pushed the door open. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. Sarah grabbed the wrench again and stepped across the threshold, ready to swing at anything that moved. But the room was still. The beam of her flashlight revealed a space that was terrifying not because it was a dungeon, but because it wasn't. The walls were lined with acoustic foam, thick, gray wedges that absorbed every decibel of sound. The floor was covered in soft, colorful interlocking play mats. In the corner, there was a bed made up with sheets patterned with galaxies and stars. There were shelves stacked high with Lego sets, expensive ones unopened. There was a small television, a beanbag chair, and a mini-fridge. It was a boy's paradise. It was a cage. And there, curled up in the corner on the beanbag chair, his knees pulled up to his chest, was a small figure in a yellow raincoat. "Leo," Sarah choked out, dropping the wrench. It hit the foam floor with a dull thud. The figure flinched violently, letting out a small, high-pitched whimper. Leo looked up, shielding his eyes from the harsh beam of the flashlight. His face was pale, streaked with tears and grime. His eyes were wide, dilated orbs of terror. "Mom," he whispered, his voice sounding flat and dead in the soundproofed room. Sarah crossed the distance in a single stride, falling to her knees and gathering him into her arms. He felt small and trembling, like a bird that had flown into a window. She buried her face in his neck, smelling the rain and the peppermint scent of the house that clung to him. "I've got you," she sobbed, rocking him back and forth. "I've got you, baby. You're safe. Mommy's here. He has a gun, Mom." Leo stammered into her shoulder, his body rigid. "He said I have to live here now. He said you don't know how to take care of me." "He's a liar," Sarah hissed, pulling back to look at him. She checked him quickly, hands, face, legs. No blood, no broken bones. Just the psychological bruising that might never heal. "We're leaving, right now." She grabbed his hand, her grip bruisingly tight. "Don't let go. No matter what happens, do not let go of my hand." "My shoes?" Leo whispered, looking at his stocking feet. "He took my light-up shoes. He said they were too noisy." "We don't need them," Sarah said, pulling him up. She grabbed the pipe wrench from the floor. "We're going." They moved toward the door. The soundproof room was suffocating, a vacuum that sucked the air out of her lungs. They stepped out into the hallway, back into the cold workshop. Sarah swept her flashlight beam across the darkness, checking the stairs. They were clear. "Stay behind me," she commanded softly. They took 2 steps toward the stairs. Then, with a loud thwack, the overhead shop lights flickered and buzzed to life. The sudden brightness was blinding. Sarah squinted, raising her arm to shield her eyes, pulling Leo behind her back. The basement was bathed in harsh, fluorescent white light that exposed every crack in the concrete, every tool on the wall. And it exposed Arthur. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, leaning casually against the railing as if he were waiting for a bus. He wasn't wearing his glasses anymore. His eyes, usually magnified and watery, were now sharp, clear, and incredibly cold. In his hands he held a double-barreled shotgun, the wood stock polished to a shine. The twin black holes of the barrel pointed directly at Sarah's chest. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He looked like a teacher who had just caught a student cheating on a test. "I'm very disappointed in you, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice calm, carrying easily over the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Breaking and entering. Destruction of property. Is this the example you want to set for the boy?" Sarah froze. She felt Leo shiver violently behind her. She tightened her grip on his hand, her other hand white-knuckled around the wrench. The wrench felt pitifully small against a shotgun. "Let us go, Arthur," Sarah said, her voice shaking but loud. "The police are on their way. I sent them the recording. They know everything." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The police? Officer Miller thinks you're a hysteric single mother who drove her husband away and is now driving her son away. By the time they actually get a warrant to come in here, Leo and I will be long gone. We're going on a trip, aren't we, Leo? A field trip." "No!" Leo shouted from behind Sarah, his voice cracking. Arthur's face hardened. He took a step forward, the gun not wavering. "You see what you've done, Sarah? You've upset him. You bring chaos wherever you go. Noise, yelling, rushing. That's no way to raise a sensitive child. He needs quiet. He needs structure. He needs a father." "You are not his father," Sarah spat, stepping in front of Leo to shield him completely. "You are a sick, lonely old man who steals children because nobody can stand to be around you." The insult landed. Arthur's eye twitched. The mask of the benevolent grandfather slipped, revealing the snarling narcissist beneath. He racked the slide of the shotgun, a sound that echoed with terrifying finality in the concrete box. Clack, clack. "Drop the wrench, Sarah," Arthur commanded, his voice dropping an octave. "Drop it, or I will blow your legs off and drag the boy out over your bleeding body. I have a first aid kit. I can keep you alive long enough to watch us leave." Sarah looked at the gun. She looked at the stairs behind him, the only exit. She looked at the wrench in her hand. She calculated the distance. 10 feet. Too far to lunge. If she dropped the wrench, she was defenseless. If she didn't, he would shoot. "I said," Arthur roared, his face turning red. "Drop it!" Slowly, Sarah uncurled her fingers. The heavy steel wrench slipped from her hand and clattered loudly onto the concrete floor. Arthur smiled, a thin, triumphant twisting of his lips. "Good girl. Now kick it over here." Sarah hesitated. Then she kicked the wrench. It skid across the floor, coming to a rest at Arthur's feet. "Now," Arthur said, gesturing with the barrel of the gun toward the soundproof room. "Back inside. Both of you. It seems the guest list has expanded." The distance between the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun and the human heart is a mathematical equation of survival, and Sarah Walker was failing it. She stood 5 feet away from Arthur, her body angled instinctively to shield Leo, who was pressed so hard against her back she could feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of his pulse through her wet blouse. The fluorescent shop lights hummed overhead, a sterile, maddening buzz that seemed to scour the inside of her skull. It was a sound that belonged in a dentist's office or a grocery store. Not here. Not in a concrete tomb where a neighbor she had trusted for 3 years was casually debating whether to execute her now or later. Arthur adjusted his grip on the weapon. The wood of the stock creaked slightly, a tiny, organic sound in the dead air. He looked calm, almost bored, the way a parent looks when dealing with a tantruming toddler. That was the true horror of it. There was no frothing rage, no maniacal laughter. There was just the terrifying, bureaucratic efficiency of a man who believed he was tidying up a mess. "Back inside," Arthur repeated, gesturing with the muzzle of the gun toward the heavy steel door of the soundproof room. "I won't ask a third time, Sarah. I have a schedule to keep. The van is already packed." "You're insane?" Sarah breathed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. She kept her eyes locked on his, trying to find a shred of the man she knew. The gardener, the bike fixer. But that man had never existed. "You think you can just take him? You think he'll ever love you? He's terrified of you." "He'll adjust," Arthur said dismissively, his gaze flicking to Leo. "Children are resilient, much more resilient than damaged adults. Once we get to the cabin, once he sees the observatory I've built, he'll understand. I'm saving him from a life of mediocrity. From you." "He needs his mother," Sarah shouted, the sound echoing sharply off the concrete walls. "He needs a father," Arthur roared back, his composure cracking for a split second, revealing the jagged, ugly wound of his own loneliness underneath. "Someone who understands discipline. Someone who doesn't lose him in the middle of the damn afternoon." The outburst echoed in the silence that followed. Sarah's mind raced, processing the geography of the room at hyperspeed. The stairs were behind Arthur, blocked. The wrench was at his feet, useless. The only other object in play was the heavy steel door of the soundproof room to her right. If they went back in there, he would slide the bolt. He would bury them alive. She would rather die on this concrete floor fighting than let that bolt slide home. She needed a variable. She needed chaos. Leo, peering out from behind her hip, whispered, "Mom, Major Tom." "Shoo," Sarah hissed, not looking down. "No, Mom," Leo whispered again, urgent and trembling. "Major Tom. He has the signal." Sarah didn't understand, but Arthur heard. He sneered, shifting his weight. Still with the doll. "See? This is what I mean. Stunted development. Throw the doll in the trash. Leo, we'll buy you real telescopes." "He's not a doll," Leo said, his voice small but surprisingly clear. He stepped out slightly from behind Sarah. In his hand, he held the battered astronaut figure. The battery compartment on the back was still open, the wires exposed where Sarah had ripped the SD card out upstairs. Arthur rolled his eyes, lowering the gun just a fraction of an inch, confident in his total control. "Get in the room." And then it happened. A sound cut through the basement air. Shrill, electronic, and impossibly loud. "Bring ring. Bring ring." It wasn't a fire alarm. It wasn't a siren. It was the default ringtone of an iPhone. Sarah felt the vibration against her thigh. It was her phone, still in her back pocket. Detective Miller was finally calling back. The noise was startlingly out of place in the dungeon-like atmosphere. Arthur flinched. It was a reflex, an involuntary twitch of the nerves. His eyes darted away from Sarah for a microsecond, looking toward the source of the sound, her hip. "Turn it off," Arthur barked, the gun barrel wavering. "Give it to me." Time seemed to liquefy, slowing down into thick, sluggish syrup. Sarah saw Arthur's eyes shift. She saw the shotgun tip dip slightly to the left. She saw the pipe wrench lying on the floor, just inches from the toe of Arthur's brown orthopedic shoe. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She let the animal inside her take the wheel. "Catch!" Sarah screamed. She ripped the phone from her pocket, the screen glowing with Miller's name, and hurled it not at Arthur, but at the fluorescent light fixture directly above his head. It was a desperate, clumsy throw, but adrenaline guided it. The heavy smartphone smashed into one of the long glass tubes with a sickening pop. The tube shattered. A rain of glass shards and white dust fell onto Arthur. The light fixture sparked and fizzled, plunging the bottom of the stairs into a strobe-like chaos of flickering shadows. Arthur yelled in surprise, shielding his face with his free hand, the shotgun swinging wildly to the side. "You stupid bee!" "Run, Leo!" Sarah shrieked. She didn't run away. She ran forward. She launched herself at Arthur, a missile of maternal rage. She didn't go for the gun. She wasn't trained for that. She went for the legs. She dove, her shoulders slamming into Arthur's knees with the force of a linebacker. The old man crumpled. He was strong, but he was top-heavy and off-balance. He went down hard, the back of his head cracking against the wooden banister of the stairs. The shotgun discharged boom. A deafening roar that blew a hole in the ceiling tiles, sending a cloud of plaster dust raining down on them. The noise was physically painful, a thunderclap in a box. Sarah's ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She scrambled on top of Arthur, her fingers clawing at his face, his eyes, anything she could reach. "Go, Leo! Go up the stairs!" She screamed, though she couldn't hear her own voice over the ringing. Arthur was thrashing beneath her, grunting with animalistic fury. He dropped the gun, but his hands, large and surprisingly powerful, found Sarah's throat. He squeezed. The world began to spot with black. Sarah gagged, clawing at his wrists. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone, and his face was twisted into a rictus of pure hate. "You ruined it!" He spat, spittle flying onto her face. "You ruin everything." Sarah couldn't breathe. Her vision tunneled. She saw the pipe wrench lying a few feet away, skittering across the floor in the struggle. Too far. She thrashed, kicking her legs, trying to find leverage. Then, she saw movement in the periphery of her darkening vision. Leo! He hadn't run. He was standing by the workbench, trembling, his eyes huge. He was holding something heavy. A metal vice grip? No, a hammer. "Leo, go!" Sarah tried to wheeze, but no sound came out. Arthur tightened his grip. Sarah's lungs burned. She felt her strength fading, her arms growing heavy. Suddenly, Arthur howled. Leo had rushed forward, not with the hammer, but with his teeth. He bit down hard on Arthur's forearm, sinking his teeth into the flesh right above the wrist. Arthur roared, releasing his grip on Sarah's throat to backhand the boy. "Get off me, you little brat." The blow caught Leo on the shoulder, knocking him backward onto the concrete. But the grip was broken. Air rushed into Sarah's lungs. Sweet, cold, dusty air. She didn't waste the oxygen on a scream. She wasted it on a maneuver. As Arthur turned his attention to Leo, Sarah grabbed the banister post and hauled herself up. She saw the shotgun lying on the floor near the stairs. She lunged for it. Arthur saw it too. He scrambled on his hands and knees, kicking out at her. His boot connected with her ribs, sending a jolt of agony through her side that nearly made her black out again. She collapsed, gasping, her fingers inches from the cold wood of the shotgun stock. Arthur scrambled up, panting, blood dripping from his arm where Leo had bitten him. He looked wild, disheveled, the mask completely gone. He reached for the gun. Sarah looked at Leo. He was curled on the floor, clutching his shoulder. She looked at Arthur's hand closing around the barrel of the shotgun. She had 1 second. 1 second before he turned the gun on them and finished what he started. She couldn't reach the gun. She couldn't reach Leo. Her hand brushed against something in her pocket. The other pocket. Not a weapon. The lighter. The cheap plastic Bic lighter she used to light candles when the power went out. She looked at the floor. The glass from the broken light fixture. The shattered phone. And a puddle. When Arthur had fallen, he had knocked over a can of solvent on the bottom shelf of the workbench. A clear, pungent liquid was pooling rapidly around the rubber mats, spreading toward the pile of old newspapers Arthur used for packing. Arthur raised the shotgun, leveling it at Sarah. His chest was heaving. "It didn't have to be this way," he wheezed. "I wanted to be gentle." Sarah flicked the lighter. The flame sparked, tiny, yellow, insignificant. She met Arthur's eyes. "Go to hell." She dropped the lighter into the puddle of solvent. The ignition was not the slow, creeping spread of a campfire. It was a violent, concussive whoosh that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. The moment the cheap plastic lighter hit the pool of solvent, the liquid didn't just burn. It bloomed. A wall of orange and blue flame erupted between Sarah and Arthur, rolling upward toward the ceiling tiles like a breaking wave of superheated gas. The force of the heat was physical. A solid punch that threw Sarah backward onto her elbows, singing the hair on her forearms and instantly curling the edges of the rubber floor mats. Arthur screamed, a sound of shock rather than pain, as he stumbled back, shielding his face with the crook of his arm. The shotgun in his hand discharged again, a reflex of his startled nerves, but the blast went wild, blowing a hole in a shelf of paint cans. White latex exploded outward, sizzling as it hit the inferno, adding a thick, acrid white smoke to the rising black column of chemical fumes. "Move, Leo, move!" Sarah choked out, scrambling to her feet. The air was already becoming unbreathable, a hot, toxic soup that tasted of burning plastic and paint thinner. Leo was paralyzed, staring at the wall of fire with wide, tear-filled eyes. The flames were licking at the workbench, climbing the pegboard where the tools hung like blackened skeletons. Sarah didn't wait for him to process the trauma. She lunged through the shimmering heat, grabbing him by the back of his raincoat. She hauled him up with a strength she didn't possess 10 minutes ago, swinging him toward the stairs. "Don't look back. Go!" she screamed, shoving him toward the wooden steps. The basement was turning into a furnace. The acoustic foam lining the soundproof room caught fire, and the material didn't just burn. It melted, dripping flaming globs of black goo onto the floor. The fire alarm finally triggered upstairs, a shrill, piercing shriek that cut through the roar of the flames, adding a layer of sonic panic to the chaos. Sarah risked one glance backward. Through the dancing curtain of fire, she saw a silhouette rising from the smoke. Arthur wasn't dead. He was coughing, his clothes smoking, his face smeared with soot and white paint, but he was moving. He swatted at the flames as if they were annoying insects. His eyes locked on the stairs with the mania of a captain who refused to let his ship be stolen. He stepped through the edge of the fire, the hem of his trousers catching light. He didn't seem to notice. He still held the shotgun. "You're not taking him," Arthur roared, his voice a ragged croak over the crackle of the blaze. He raised the gun, aiming blindly through the smoke toward the staircase. Sarah threw herself on top of Leo, flattening them both against the splintery wood of the stairs just as the gun went off. Boom! The banister above their heads exploded into toothpicks, with chips rained down on Sarah's neck. "Up! Crawl!" Sarah yelled, pushing Leo's butt. They scrambled up the stairs on hands and knees, clawing at the wood. The heat rising from below was searing, baking the soles of their shoes. The smoke was thicker here, funneling up the stairwell like a chimney. Sarah couldn't see the top. She could only feel the draft of cooler air coming from the kitchen. Her lungs burned. Her ribs screamed with every movement. But the sound of heavy, clumping boots on the stairs behind them drove her forward. He was coming. He was walking through hell to get them. They burst into the kitchen, tumbling onto the linoleum floor. The contrast was jarring. The kitchen was still pristine, the kittens on the calendar still smiling, but smoke was billowing out of the open basement door in thick, oily pulses. Sarah kicked the basement door shut, slamming her shoulder against it. "The chair!" she rasped, pointing to the heavy oak dining chair. Leo jammed the chair under the knob. Leo, sobbing and coughing, dragged the heavy chair over. Sarah wedged the back of the chair under the doorknob, creating a makeshift brace. A second later, a heavy body slammed against the door from the other side. Thud! The wood groaned. The chair shuddered but held. "Sarah!" Arthur's voice was muffled, coming from behind the door, sounding like a demon trapped in a box. "Open this door. You're burning my house down. Let it burn." Sarah screamed back, grabbing Leo's hand. She pulled him toward the sliding glass door she had broken earlier to get in. The storm outside had intensified. The wind was howling, whipping the rain into horizontal sheets. The jagged hole in the glass was their only exit. Sarah grabbed a dish towel from the counter, wrapped it around her hand, and cleared the remaining shards of glass from the frame. "Careful," she panted, lifting Leo over the threshold. "Watch your knees." Leo tumbled out onto the wet patio concrete. Sarah followed, falling more than jumping, landing hard on her side in the mud. The cold rain hit her like a physical blow, shocking her overheated skin. It washed the soot from her face in gray rivulets, stinging her eyes. She gasped, sucking in gulps of clean, wet air. But they weren't safe yet. Inside the house, the basement door shattered. With a sound of splintering wood and metal, the lock gave way. The chair skidded across the kitchen floor. Sarah looked back to see Arthur stumbling into the kitchen. He was a nightmare. His sweater was scorched. His hair was singed away on one side, and he was dragging his left leg. He looked less like a man and more like a creature forged in the fire. He spotted them through the broken glass door. He raised the shotgun, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it. It clattered on the linoleum. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need it. He grabbed a carving knife from the magnetic strip on the wall, a long, gleaming blade he used for Sunday roasts, and charged at the glass door. "Run to the street," Sarah yelled, shoving Leo toward the side gate. "Run to the neighbors." She tried to stand, but her boots slipped in the mud. She went down on one knee. Arthur burst through the broken door, ignoring the glass that sliced his shins. He tackled Sarah into the garden, his weight driving her face into the wet earth. The knife flashed in the lightning. Sarah rolled, screaming, kicking out blindly. Her heel connected with his groin. Arthur grunted, doubling over, but his hand lashed out, the knife slicing a shallow gash across Sarah's upper arm. The pain was sharp and hot, mixing with the cold rain. "Ungrateful," Arthur wept, slashing again. "I gave him everything. I gave him the stars." Sarah scrambled backward on her elbows, mud coating her eyes, her mouth. She backed into the base of the birdbath. She had nowhere left to go. Arthur loomed over her, raising the knife with both hands for a killing blow. The house behind him was beginning to glow orange, flames licking at the kitchen curtains, casting a flickering, hellish light on his twisted face. "He's mine," Arthur hissed. Sarah braced herself, grabbing a handful of wet mulch to throw in his eyes. But the blow never came. A blinding white light flooded the backyard, washing out the orange glow of the fire. A voice, amplified and booming, cut through the storm. "Police! Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" Arthur froze, the knife held high, blinking into the spotlight that was cutting through the rain from the side gate. Detective Miller stood there, gun drawn, flanked by two uniformed officers. They were soaked, their faces grim masks of determination. "Arthur Vance," Miller roared, stepping into the mud. "Put it down or I will shoot you where you stand." Arthur looked at Miller. Then he looked down at Sarah. Then he looked at the burning house, his sanctuary, his museum, his prison, consuming itself. A strange look of clarity washed over his face. The rage drained away, leaving only a hollow, pathetic old man. He didn't drop the knife. He didn't attack. He simply lowered his arm, turned his back on Sarah, and looked up at the stormy sky. "Major Tom to ground control," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm losing the signal." Then he collapsed to his knees in the mud, weeping into his hands, as the officers swarmed him, tackling him into the wet earth. Sarah slumped against the birdbath, the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving her trembling uncontrollably. She looked toward the gate. Leo was standing there, held back by a female officer. He broke free. He ran to her. "Mom!" He collided with her, burying his face in her muddy, blood-stained shirt. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, burying her nose in his wet hair. She rocked him, staring up at the rain that was falling on her face, mixing with her tears. The fire raged in the house, consuming the basement, the Legos, the soundproof walls, burning it all to ash. But here, in the mud, in the rain, they were alive. The transition from the battlefield to the world of the living was not marked by peace, but by a different kind of chaos. The backyard of House 402 had become a surreal theater of flashing lights, the rhythmic thump-thump of fire hoses, and the shouting of men in heavy turnout gear. The rain continued to fall, a relentless, icy curtain that hissed as it hit the burning roof of Arthur's home, turning the rising smoke into a thick, clinging fog that smelled of wet ash and melted plastic. Sarah sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, her legs dangling, her boots caked in a mixture of garden mud and soot. A shock blanket, silver and crinkling like a candy wrapper, was draped over her shoulders, but she couldn't stop shivering. It wasn't the cold. It was the adrenaline crash, a physical withdrawal that left her muscles trembling and her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Beside her, huddled under the same metallic wing of the blanket, was Leo. He was silent, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring at a fixed point on the pavement where a puddle reflected the strobe light dance of the emergency vehicles. He was holding a cup of hot cocoa that a paramedic had pressed into his hands, but he hadn't taken a sip. He just held it, letting the warmth bleed into his frozen fingers. "Let me just check that arm, ma'am," a young paramedic said gently, peeling back the ruined fabric of Sarah's sleeve. Sarah flinched, the sting of the antiseptic swab pulling her back to reality. The cut from Arthur's carving knife was ugly, a jagged red line against her pale skin, but it wasn't deep. It was a battle scar, a receipt for the price she had paid. "It needs a few stitches," the paramedic murmured, working with quick, efficient movements. "You inhaled a lot of smoke, too. We need to take you both in for observation, just to be safe." "We stay together?" Sarah croaked, her voice sounding like it had been dragged over gravel. She tightened her arm around Leo's shoulders, pulling him so close that his wet raincoat pressed against her side. "No se separación." "Not for a second. We wouldn't dream of it," the paramedic promised, taping a piece of gauze over her arm. Sarah looked up, her gaze drawn irresistibly back to the house. It was a skeleton now, consumed by the beast Arthur had inadvertently unleashed. The fire had started in the basement, fueled by the solvents and the foam padding, and had gutted the structure from the inside out. The roof over the kitchen had collapsed moments ago with a sound like a dying exhale, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. She watched the flames lick at the window frames of the upper floor. She thought about the soundproof room, the playmats, the lock on the outside of the door. All of it was melting, twisting, disappearing into carbon and memory. The evidence of his madness was being erased by the fire, but Sarah didn't care. She didn't need a courtroom to know what had happened. She needed it to be gone. She needed that house to be a crater. "Mrs. Walker?" The voice was heavy, filled with a gravelly fatigue. Sarah turned her head to see Detective Miller standing at the edge of the ambulance bay. He looked older than he had an hour ago. His trench coat was soaked, his fedora ruined by the rain. He took off his hat, wringing it out in his hands, staring at the ground before he could meet her eyes. Miller started, then stopped. He looked at Leo, then at Sarah. The hard shell of the veteran cop cracked, revealing a man who was deeply, profoundly ashamed. "I listened to the file, the one you emailed. I was in my car driving away. Something told me to check my messages one last time." Sarah looked at him. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to ask him why he hadn't believed her sooner, why a mother's intuition was treated like hysteria until a child was nearly buried in a basement. But the anger was gone, burned away in the fire. All that was left was exhaustion. "You came back," Sarah said softly. "I should have never left," Miller said, his voice thick. "I saw the sneakers, by the back door. You were right. He wouldn't have left without his light-up shoes. They ate at me. I turned the car around before I even heard the tape. But when I heard Arthur's voice..." He shook his head, looking toward the burning house. "I've known that man for 10 years. I've had coffee on his porch. I thought I knew who the monsters were in this town." "He wore a good mask," Sarah said, resting her chin on the top of Leo's head. "We found the others," Miller added quietly, stepping closer so Leo wouldn't hear. "In the computer files before the fire spread. Arthur kept logs. You weren't the first, Sarah, but you're the first one who got their boy back." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah felt a fresh wave of nausea. She squeezed Leo tighter, terrified that if she let go, he would vanish like smoke. She had fought a dragon, but she hadn't known the dragon had been eating children for years. "Where is he?" Sarah asked, her voice hardening. Miller pointed toward a squad car parked near the end of the police cordon. In the back seat, behind the wire mesh, a figure sat silhouetted against the flashing lights. Arthur was wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window. He wasn't looking at the police or the neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk in their bathrobes, whispering and pointing. He was staring at the fire. He looked small, pathetic, a confused old man watching his life's work turn to ash. "He's confused," Miller said with grim satisfaction. "He keeps asking why Leo didn't want the Lego set. He keeps saying he built it all for him. The DA is going to have a field day. He'll never see the sky again, Mrs. Walker. I promise you that." Sarah looked at Arthur one last time. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel pity. She felt nothing. He was just a ghost now, a bad memory that she would have to help Leo forget. "Leo," Sarah whispered, nudging him gently. "Leo, look at me." Leo turned his head. His face was streaked with soot, making his eyes look impossibly bright. "Are you okay?" she asked. Leo didn't answer immediately. He reached into the deep pocket of his yellow raincoat. His hand came out in a fist. He opened his fingers slowly. Lying in his palm was Major Tom. The astronaut was battered. His paint was scorched. One leg was slightly melted from the heat of the basement, and the battery cover was missing entirely. He looked like he had actually re-entered the atmosphere, burned and scarred by the journey. Leo looked at the toy, then up at the burning house, then at his mother. "He made it," Leo whispered, his voice raspy from the smoke. "His suit is damaged, but the life support is holding." Sarah smiled, and for the first time that night, tears of relief finally spilled over, hot and cleansing. She covered Leo's hand with her own, closing his fingers over the toy. "Yeah," she choked out, kissing his forehead, tasting the salt and the rain. "He made it. Mission success, Commander. We're going home." The paramedic tapped the side of the ambulance door. "We're ready to transport, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride to the hospital, but we'll get you warm." Miller stepped back, putting his ruined hat back on his head. "I'll meet you there, Sarah. I'll handle the press. I'll handle the report. You just be a mom." "Thank you," Sarah said. It was a forgiveness he didn't deserve, but one he needed. The ambulance doors began to close, narrowing the view of the chaotic street. The last thing Sarah saw before the latch clicked shut was the burning shell of House 402, the flames raging impotently against the storm, and the flashing lights reflecting in the puddles like fallen stars. Then the doors sealed with a heavy thud. The noise of the outside world, the fire, the sirens, the shouting, was instantly muffled, replaced by the quiet hum of the ambulance engine and the rhythmic beep-beep of the heart monitor. They were enclosed in a small, bright box of safety. The vehicle lurched forward, pulling away from the curb. Sarah leaned her head back against the metal wall, closing her eyes. She could feel the vibration of the road beneath them. She could feel the warmth of the blanket. But mostly, she could feel the solid, undeniable weight of her son's head resting against her shoulder. His breathing evening out as the shock began to give way to sleep. They were moving away from the darkness. They were moving toward the morning. Time, Sarah learned, did not heal all wounds, but it did change their shape. It smoothed the jagged edges of memory like river stones, turning sharp, cutting terror into something heavier, duller, and easier to carry. 6 months had passed since the night of the fire. The blackened skeleton of the house on Oak Street had been bulldozed, leaving a vacant lot that looked like a missing tooth in the neighborhood's smile. But Sarah and Leo weren't there to see the grass grow over the scorched earth. They had moved 3 days after the ambulance ride, leaving the suburbs for a small, 2-bedroom apartment on the 6th floor of a building in downtown Seattle. Sarah wanted height. She wanted distance from the ground. She wanted a fortress in the sky where no one could walk up to the back door. It was a Tuesday evening, raining again, the kind of relentless Pacific Northwest drizzle that used to make Sarah's heart hammer against her ribs. For the first few weeks, every time the sky turned gray, She would find herself standing by the window, gripping the sill until her knuckles turned white, waiting for a monster to emerge from the mist. But tonight, the rain was just rain. It was merely weather, washing the city dust from the glass. Sarah stood at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables. The rhythm was familiar, chop, 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 but the silence of the apartment was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the old house. It was a comfortable quiet, filled with the hum of the city below and the soft, scratching sound coming from the living room rug. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the archway. Leo was lying on his stomach, surrounded by a chaotic galaxy of Lego bricks. He wasn't building the International Space Station. The bribe Arthur had used to lure him into the dark. That set had burned, unbuilt, in the basement. Instead, Leo was building something entirely his own. It was a sprawling, multicolored base with mismatched towers, laser turrets made of red bricks, and a docking bay that defied the laws of physics. "Status report, Commander?" Sarah asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. Leo looked up. His hair had grown out, covering the faint scar on his forehead where he had hit the concrete floor that night. The terror that had lived in his eyes for weeks, the shadow that made him scream in his sleep and wet the bed, had retreated. It was still there, lurking in the corners like a shy ghost, but it no longer sat at the head of the table. "Perimeter secure," Leo said, his voice steady. He picked up a small gray radar dish and snapped it onto the highest tower. "Shields are at 100%. "Good to know," Sarah smiled, walking over and sitting on the floor beside him. "We can't be too careful with those Martian dust storms." She watched his hands. They were steady. He manipulated the tiny plastic bricks with a dexterity he hadn't possessed 6 months ago. The trauma had forced him to grow up, to harden in places that should have remained soft, but it had also given him a strange, quiet resilience. He was no longer the boy who hid behind her legs. He was a boy who had bitten a monster to save his mother. "Mom?" Leo asked, not looking up from his construction. "Yeah, Bug? Do you think he's cold?" Sarah froze. They rarely spoke of Arthur. They called him the bad man or simply him, but she knew who he meant. She knew that Arthur was currently sitting in a maximum security psychiatric facility, waiting for a trial that would likely never happen due to his deteriorating mental state. "No," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "He's in a place with walls and blankets. He's not cold, but he's never coming out." Leo nodded, snapping a yellow window frame into place. "Good, because if he came out, Major Tom would have to neutralize him." Sarah's eyes drifted to the center of the Lego fortress. Standing there, glued to a makeshift pedestal of blue bricks, was Major Tom. The action figure was a survivor of war. His plastic suit was scorched black on the left side. His helmet visor was cracked. The battery compartment on his back was gone, leaving a gaping hole where the mission logs used to be hidden. He looked battered, ruined, and undeniably heroic. Leo refused to replace him. "Scars mean you survived," he had told Sarah when she offered to buy a new one on eBay. "Major Tom is retired from combat, remember?" Sarah said gently, reaching out to touch the toy's melted boot. "He's in a consultant role now. Ground control handles the security." Leo stopped building. He sat up, crossing his legs, and looked at his mother with an intensity that made him look decades older. "Your ground control." "I am," Sarah agreed, her throat tightening. "You came for me," Leo said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a piece of data he was filing away in his permanent record. "In the basement, when the fire started, you came back down." "I will always come back down," Sarah whispered, reaching out to cup his face. Her thumb brushed his cheek. "There is no wall, no door, no fire hot enough to keep me away from you, Leo. That's the mission parameter. It never changes." Leo leaned into her hand, closing his eyes for a second. Then he opened them and picked up Major Tom. He pulled something from his pocket, a small, shiny piece of gold foil, likely a wrapper from a chocolate coin. He began wrapping it around the toy's melted arm, fashioning a makeshift cast. "He needs armor," Leo murmured. "Gold armor, like the sun." Sarah watched him work. She thought about the fear that still woke her up at 3 a.m., the phantom smell of smoke that sometimes caught in her nose when she was driving. She thought about the pipe wrench, the fire, the mud. She had spent so many years trying to protect Leo from the world, terrified that he was too fragile for it. She had been wrong. He wasn't glass. He was iron. And she wasn't just a mother. She was a lioness. The storm outside picked up, the wind rattling the balcony door. Leo didn't flinch. He just pressed the gold foil tight around Major Tom's arm. "Done," Leo declared, placing the figure back in the Lego tower. "Now he's stronger. He looks ready for anything," Sarah said. She stood up, her knees cracking slightly. "Dinner in 10 minutes, Commander. Wash up." "Roger that," Leo said. Sarah walked back to the kitchen, but stopped at the sliding glass door leading to the balcony. She unlocked it and stepped out into the rain. The wind whipped her hair back, cold and bracing. She looked out over the city of Seattle, a grid of lights glittering in the darkness. Somewhere down there, in the dark patches between the streetlights, bad things happened. People took what didn't belong to them. But up here, 6 floors above the sorrow, there was light. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, charred object she had kept hidden for months. It was the melted remains of the digital lock from Arthur's basement door, the piece she had smashed with the wrench. She had picked it up from the mud that night, a talisman of her victory. She looked at it one last time, feeling the jagged edges bite into her palm. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need to hold onto the violence to remember the strength. Sarah drew her arm back and threw the piece of plastic as hard as she could. It spun out into the void, disappearing into the rainy night, falling down, 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 back to the earth where it belonged. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, wet air. She turned around and looked back into the apartment. Through the glass, she saw Leo. He was making Major Tom walk along the ramparts of his Lego castle, his mouth moving as he whispered sound effects. He was playing. He was happy. He was safe. Sarah smiled, a genuine, bone-deep smile that reached her eyes. She stepped back inside, sliding the door shut and locking it. Not out of fear, but out of habit. She walked into the kitchen, picked up the wooden spoon, and stirred the pot. The mission was ongoing. The orbit had changed, the trajectory adjusted, but the ship was steady. "Ground control to Major Tom," she called out cheerfully. "Dinner is deployed." From the living room, a boy's laugh rang out, bright, loud, and entirely unbroken. "Copy that, ground control. Coming in for a landing."